I'm Wendy Moran, an assurance partner at McGowan Hurst Clark & Smith. Today I'm going to talk about some specific considerations for construction and engineering companies when adopting the new 5-step revenue recognition model. Step 1, identify the contract with the customer. Current guidance allows for a company to combine contracts with different customers when certain criteria are met. The new standard requires contracts entered into or near the same time with the same customer to be combined when certain criteria are met. Contracts with different customers can no longer be combined. Contract modifications, common in the engineering and construction industry, are accounted for either as a separate contract or as part of the existing contract, depending on certain criteria as outlined in the new guidance. Step 2, identify the performance obligations. Under current guidance, companies often account for contracts at the overall contract level. The new guidance requires companies to assess whether goods or services within a contract are separate performance obligations or if the contract is one performance obligation. Given the high level of integration within construction and engineering contracts, many contracts may indeed still meet that single performance obligation criteria. However, companies must assess and support this conclusion. Step 3, determine the transaction price. Common forms of variable consideration include awards and incentive payments, penalties, change orders, customer-provided materials, and claims and liquidation damages. These must be separately assessed and accounted for under the new guidance. Step 4, allocate the transaction price to the performance obligations. Under the new guidance, variable consideration, including awards or incentive payments, may need to be allocated to one or more performance obligations rather than the contract as a whole. Under the new standard, companies will need to allocate the transaction price to the separate performance obligations. Step 5, recognize revenue when or as performance obligations are satisfied. Contracting and engineering services are generally provided over a period of time and will most likely meet the criteria for revenue recognition over time, which is similar to the current guidance. However, a contract-by-contract analysis to determine and support this conclusion is required. Measurement of progress towards completion under the new guidance will require consideration of special terms within contracts. These include termination rights, the right to demand or retain payments, and the legal title to work in process. Companies will need to select either an input method, for example, labor hours or costs incurred, or an output method, such as milestones reached or units produced, to measure progress and recognize revenue. Other considerations include contract cost. Under new guidance, contractors will no longer be able to defer cost if the performance obligation qualifies for the overtime recognition, unless the costs qualify for capitalization based on either the cost to fulfill the contract or cost to obtain guidance. Costs incurred to satisfy a performance obligation are expensed as incurred. Setup and mobilization costs will need to be evaluated to determine if such activities are capitalizable under the new revenue recognition guidance. A second consideration relates to unbilled receivables or billings in excess of costs and estimated earnings. Under new guidance, when a contractor's performance exceeds the billable amount, or the right to consideration is conditional on something other than the passage of time, the contractor records a contract asset for the difference. When a customer's payments exceed the contractor's progress, the contractor records a contract liability for this difference. However, if the contract is non-cancelable, the new standard requires that a contract recognize a receivable when it is due, even if the amount has not been invoiced, because the contractor has an unconditional right to that consideration. The timing of invoices may not reflect when a contractor has that unconditional right to consideration. The above are just a few examples of items for construction and engineering companies to be mindful of with the new revenue recognition guidance. Please see our other vlogs on revenue recognition or contact your accounting professional or us here at McGowan Hurst Clark & Smith for additional details and advice.